everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for day 2 and a week-long Winter Wonderland video series featuring Penny Black's newest scenic stamps. And the stamp that I am featuring today is 40-869 Traverse. And in this series, I'm sharing 2 cards featuring one stamp, a simple non-painting technique, and a second, more layered and painted design. And the first technique or the card requires no watercoloring, and it really features, as you can see here, a simple classic style. It's easy to do, but it's really beautiful. So let's go ahead and get started with technique number 1. So I am stamping using a MISTI stamp positioning tool, and I'm stamping onto Bristol smooth paper, and I'm using that paper for both cards. This, you will see here, is cut to 5 by 7, but the finished cards both are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And for this first card, I'm starting with the smallest little cabin here, and I'm going to use a mix on this card of ink pads and markers. So for very small spaces where I really need to get in there and get those details with a pointed tip, I'm going to use my Tombow dual brush pens. For example, here on the bridge, I want to be able to get that with that marker and not get that into the water. It's got a curve, a little bit harder to get an ink pad on that. And so I'm just going to stamp that using the markers. I'm working section by section. Now, if I can sort of turn my ink pad and get it on there, I will. I prefer to stamp with the ink pads for large areas because an ink pad is going to get you the most even coverage. You're padding the flat surface of the ink pad onto the flat surface of the stamp, and that gets the best coverage of ink. But you can't always fit that in there. So when I can't, that's when I grab my markers and pull those in. I'm using here like a Ranger Archival ink in a mini size. That also makes it easier to sort of position and get that ink just where I want it. And if I get it in any spots like where I don't want it, I just use my fingertip. I always try to look before I stamp it and use my fingertip to wipe it away. You could also use a paper towel if you didn't want to have as colorful fingertips as I do. And sometimes I will even pull in a full-size ink pad if it's a large area. Really just use what you have and give those a try. You can, by turning them and just wiping off any areas that you didn't mean to get it, use probably what you have in your stash. I'm picking based on colors that I like because I'm not planning to do any water or blending with this card, this one here. So I don't need to pick a water soluble ink or a waterproof ink if I was like going to paint the background or something. So it's just very easy. You don't need to worry. Grab the colors that you like and use those on there. The only thing I recommend not using is an alcohol based marker directly to your stamp. If you're coloring with a marker onto your stamp, you want to use a water based marker for this look. Now you can layer up your ink, so I did a lighter green, and then along the bottom I'm going in and just patting a darker green on there, and you can start to get some depth and dimension. Now I will have all of the exact colors that I'm using, so whether it's inks or markers, the paper, all of my supplies are listed for you down in the YouTube description box below. So you can see all of those down below if you want to play along or want to know a particular color that was used. That is as simple as it is for that first card. Just inking it up and stamping section by section. To finish it off, I do like to add a little detail with some die cutting. I used our Stitch Circles die, and as well as one snowflake from the die set 51-268 A Blizzard. And then the sentiment is stamped from 30-925 Jolly Snippets down at the bottom. And I just layered that circular die over what I stamped to just capture a part of that image, and it gives it a totally different look and just a really fun, simple, classic looking card. You could make a lot of these, and it's just beautiful. So now we'll move on to the second technique. This adds a bit of watercoloring and stamp layering for kind of an artsy but very doable finished card. So I'm going to start by just making a mask here. So I am going to stamp the top portion here of these trees Just to start things off, onto some Eclipse masking paper. This is like a giant sticky note, and so I'm just going to stamp those. Doesn't need to be stamped well, I just need to know where they're at. Then I'll trim that out and you'll see that come back a little later on. Now I'm going to work on my card. Again, this is that Strathmore Bristol cardstock. It's very, very smooth, and it's, for me, a key to having some success with blending these colors and getting the details like we did on the first card. So I'm coloring onto my stamp using my Tombow dual brush pens. Again, the exact colors used will be listed down in the YouTube description box. Then afterward, just picking up a paintbrush with some water on it and blending, just lightly painting over some of the areas where I've stamped. Now I do put my paintbrush into my cup of water and pat it a little bit onto a paper towel before I bring it to the paper, and that gives me much more control. Now for these trees, I'm going to ink them up with a distress ink pad. It's the mini ink pad, helps me with placement onto the stamp. It's not so large. If I get anywhere I don't want it, you'll see me just grab my finger and kind of wipe that away. You can layer up more than one color if you want, and I'm going to stamp this down. Now, because I want that watercolor look, that is why I picked the distress inks for this second card, because here I can go in with my paintbrush and some water. They're a water-based ink, so I can blend out that ink, give it more of a watercolor look with my paintbrush. You also could try misting your stamp with water before you stamp it. For me, I feel like I lose a little bit more detail than I want to and just don't have quite as much control by misting my stamp. So this is the technique that I prefer, going in with the paintbrush and some water and just lightly blending things. Now, you'll notice here, I haven't stamped the bridge yet, I haven't stamped the water, and that's one thing that's really fun about these scenic stamps is you could stop here and create a totally different look, different card without the bridge, without the water. You don't have to use the entire stamp. So when you get these stamps, you can use the composition of the entire stamp that's right there for you. You don't have to come up with anything on your own, just add your color and stamp and it is complete. But if you want to play around and get creative, you can just use parts of the stamp. You could just use, like here, just the cabin and the trees in the background. You could use just the cabin and some other tree stamps that you have in the foreground. So you can really play around with it. You're kind of getting like multiple stamps in one if you decide to use just parts of the stamp onto your card. So I like to point that out because it's really fun to start getting creative with mixing and matching different pieces of these scenic stamps together. Now for this card though, I just have to use this bridge. I think it is so beautiful. And so I'm just inking that up. You can see I sort of turn my ink pad, so I'm using sort of the corner or the side of it to help get the ink where I want it. And then I will go in and blend that. I'm so sorry for my hair in my head there. Sometimes I just get carried away with what I'm making and forget that I am recording and lean right out in the way. Now, if you find you overblend an area or you're not totally happy with the color, you can restamp it. You could blend it out and then restamp it again and have that watercolor look underneath, but more of the detail there from the restamping on top. So lots of different ways. Play around with these as you go, and don't be afraid to try different things with them. There's no wrong way to do this. So here I have added that bridge in there. Now I'm going to work on sort of the ice and the water and snow down here below. So I've stamped that using that distress ink so it's water soluble, and then I am blending it out. Again, for me the key is using that Bristol paper and also going section by section and blending after each section and not letting that sit so long. So I wouldn't want to stamp the whole thing the entire scene and then try and go back and blend it. I just find it's easier and blends easier if you do it right away. You could see I did a lighter blue and then just did a section in the darker blue and then sort of blended them together. So that's another way you can add shading to the scene. This is so fun to do as you're stamping this. It just feels like magical, like, oh my gosh, look what I'm creating. Oh, look how that bridge turned out, or the trees and the shading and how realistic it looks. If you haven't tried these stamps, I highly recommend it. It's really, really fun and the results are amazing. And while this second technique has more parts to it, it is really not that difficult. Just take it a little bit step by step at a time. Here I wanted to add a little shadowing over here by the cabin, so I just pressed my ink pad to my acrylic block and picked that up with my paintbrush, and I'm just painting that on. Blending here a little bit on the road. Just adding, giving it that watercolor look throughout the entire scene. Now, you could certainly stop here, stamp your sentiment. I think this is stunning. This is beautiful. But I'm going to add another layer. Just wanted to show you again that there's lots you can do with these stamps. So I'm going to use 30-514 Seasons Marvel. This is a great sort of additional stamp if you want to add more layers and play around with different things in your scenes. So here's that mask that I stamped at the very beginning of this technique. I cut that out just around those trees. I only need the top part of it. And I'm going to cover up those trees, just mask them. Then I'm going to grab these mountains that are a part of this Seasons Marvel set. I'm just kind of playing around with where I want to position those based on where those trees are. And I'm going to grab my ink. Now, all of the exact colors of ink, like I mentioned before, will be listed down in that YouTube description box below. Now here I just stamped along the very top of those mountains, and I only am showing them sort of in that gap between the two tallest trees. I used an Archival ink in a very light color. I believe it was gray or shadow gray. And I'm doing that so I can paint the sky before I add the mountains in there. And so that just gives me sort of that horizon line, or that line where the sky is going to stop and the mountains start. And I pressed my Distress ink pad to my acrylic block, and I'm just picking up some of that ink and painting in the sky. I want to be careful it's not too wet so that it bleeds under that mask and those trees, the ink that the trees were stamped in, start blending up into the sky. So it's not too dark of a sky, it's not too wet on that paper, but just enough there. These mountains are designed to have sort of the snow-capped look, so I wanted to have some color in the sky so that that snow that's on the mountains would show. Now, you don't want your paper to move. I bumped mine there, so thankfully it was a clear stamp I was using. I could line those mountains back up where I originally stamped them. And if they were off a little bit, it's not a big deal. I could just blend it up into the sky, but you saw me there peeking over the top. Now I'm ready to stamp these mountains and paint them in. So I am using now the Distress inks on those because I want to be able to blend that out. So I've stamped it and I'm just blending that. Promise that's what I'm doing behind my head. Sorry, sorry. I'm going to keep some of that white, but just soften that edge a little bit. And then I just removed the mask, and look at that. Now there's mountains in the scene. That is so, so fun to do. I did want to shade this a little more after I had taken it out of there. I thought, oh, I think I want to just kind of blend that a little bit more. So you can always go back and just paint on top of what you've stamped, even if your stamp and everything is out of your stamp positioning tool. You can just go back and paint and shade anytime. There's no right or wrong about that. So that's what I'm doing here, and kind of just darkening them up a little bit too. But as you can see, there's just so many different ways you can start playing with these scenic stamps, and they're great because you can use them for Christmas cards, certainly, but you can use them for wintertime cards, masculine cards, winter birthdays, just a hello, thinking of you in the wintertime. So there's just lots and lots of different ways and times that you can use them to get the most out of them. Here I'm just picking up a little bit of white acrylic paint and adding that bright white snow in the background. And I like how that bright white kind of ties into the roof line on the cabin. And I can even pull some of that in onto the trees, a few little snowflakes or sort of snow on the branches. Those trees, though, are designed within the stamp to give you that look of snow. So that's really nice too. But if you've over blended anywhere, you can always go back in with that white just to brighten things up. And a little touch of shading there on the roof of the cabin. I'm just fiddling here. Now to finish off this card, I stamped a sentiment from our new transparent set, Meaningful 30-919, and this second card is complete. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. This is day 2, and there are more days of this scenic stamping coming, so subscribe, hit that notification bell so you get a notification when the next video is uploaded. And you can continue to connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, as well as Instagram, our website, and blog, and I will link all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. Happy stamping!